So what's up guys, thank you very much for taking the time to lock in. Thought it was time to drop another video, so let's get straight into it. As you can see here, I'm using the 360 mirror, excellent for being able to give us the back. And then the first thing I'm going to do is establish the lowest point, which is my zero guard. Now if you can see, I'm using 5-star trimmer. I have zero gapped them, and all I've done is I've set my lowest point at the very back. It might be a bit different to what you see other stylists do, but because I have a bone that sticks out, so the occipital bone which sticks out, I tried to put this lowest point at the back just below it so that it fades into it, and using the darkness to obviously cover the bone. And then all I do is I go to the temple and then I create my second guideline. So if you can see here, this is pretty much where I started, and all I've done is I've followed the line and dropped right to the back. Now for the purposes of this video, I have stopped, or I have skipped the other side. Reason being, you can't really see it because this camera angle will be staying on my right side. And then all I've done there is I've just replicated the exact same thing. Now the hard part about this is learning to put your strongest arm on the other side of your head, but with some practice, and it does take practice, it comes. Now if you see here, now what I've taken is the Wolf 5-star detailer with the T wide head, and in a similar motion, all I'm doing is I am making good contact with the sideburn, and I'm coming straight up, not going right to the top of that line. All I'm doing is pretty much staying about a couple of millimeters below it. Now to the untrained eye, it looks like this is absolutely bald. However, if you were to stand very close, you'd see that there is still some stubble. So all this is doing at the moment is just removing a lot of the bulk. Now this is pretty much quite a time consuming piece of work, especially when you are marking out the guidelines and where you want to obviously start, but over time you get quite quick with this. I found one of the best things to do is to work in overlapping sections, so don't just go from like one part to another. Work in overlapping sections using half of the T-blade as a guideline, and that way you can kind of pick up any missing pieces of hair. Now if you can see here, all I've done is I've just flipped it to the other side, and I'm using the right side of the 360 mirror. I will leave a link in the description for all these tools and gadgets I'm using, because obviously this is a very simple haircut, so only a few tools are needed. You don't need loads and loads of trimmers like back in the day when you used to go to these barbers. It just had loads and loads of tools. Nowadays we've kind of taught ourselves to be able to do a whole trim with 1 or 2 clippers, a few equipment. And if you're anything like me and you travel quite a lot and you need to be looking good for events and meeting people, so on and so forth, then traveling with the least amount is the best. Now I'm using the Andes foil shavers here. Now one thing that you should be able to notice is, if you look at the way that I'm holding it, my thumb is on the on switch, right? Now one thing that you can't see is I'm only using the top blade, right? So I'm not using both of the sides of the blade, I'm just using the top blade, right? And then very similarly to the T-blade, all I'm doing is I'm going up, but I'm not going all the way up to the line, right? I'm leaving a couple of millimeters just in place, right? Now the reason why that is it gives you a little bit of leeway between this line and the T-blade line and the zero, right? So obviously when you take a step back, you can see like a really nice blurry fade, and it just gives that nice impression of a smooth transition. Now all I've done is I'm just taking this T-blade and I'm just knocking out that line that's been created between the foil shaver and the zero, right? So if you think about it like this is like a really small parameter that we're working on. You know, we're talking millimeters, but it gives that overall professional effect to the finish. Now what I'm doing now, quickly brushing the hair, because the natural hair growth of my hair, it grows to the right, like a comb over. So all I've done is I'm trying to cut it out of the way, because once you put the trimmer down to the skin, what you don't want to do is obviously stop halfway and obviously have to start combing and sectioning hair. So it's just a bit of intelligent working just to move the hair out of the way. Now at this point all I'm doing now is it's an open blade, so this is the clipper with the blade fully open, and I'm creating that transition line now. Now that transition line, it depends on obviously what you want the haircut to look like, but this video was taken in the summertime, and because it was taken in the summertime, I was going for a slightly higher fade on the sides and dropping down at the back, so I'd say just under an inch. Now one thing that you'll notice here going towards the back is I'm trying to avoid running straight over that bone that sticks out, and I'm trying to fade into that bone, so I'm trying to keep the hair dark and heavy where that bone is. Alright, now all I'm doing, working in small overlapping sections, going straight up. Alright, I don't move side to side, I just go straight up, and again obviously repeat on the other side, and then you can just match it up here. Okay, so there where the clipper is now, that is the occipital bone. Alright. So again, I'm just doing a little bit of combing just to move the hair out of the way. Now this is the part where it's bulk removal, right? So if you look here, right, I'm going straight up. So I'm not following the shape of the head, because where I'm going straight up, I'm trying to create that impression of a square haircut, right? So it's not to give me a nice rounded haircut, because it would give me the impression that my head was egg-shaped, even if it is egg-shaped, right? So where the corners of my head are, because I've got quite a square head, I'm going straight up. Alright, so if you notice the movement of the clipper and the comb is going straight up, it's not following or it's not rounding. Right, now all this is doing is creating a second guideline. Alright, exactly the same thing. You might have to play around between the different guards, but this is probably I think about 3. Right, and I go between a 2 and a 3 and a 4 depending on how long it is on top. On this particular haircut, I am cutting the top using scissors at the end. Sometimes when my hair is really long, what I tend to do is do the scissor cut first, get it all down to length, and then blow dry, and then do the haircut afterwards. Okay, quick little dust off. Now this part itself is what I call the magic part of the fade. This is the favorite part. Now it's not so much, the skin line isn't the hardest part, it's quite uniform. This part is the part that takes a bit of skill, because it's not always going to be the same. Now this is a 1.5 blade, right? But this is taken off a barberless comb. Now all I've done is I've opened it fully, so the blade is fully open, right? Now all I'm doing is I'm creating a second guideline into that number 2, right? And the reason why this is like a bit of a safety guard, because when you're doing a slightly higher fade, you have to be a bit careful because the margin for error is slightly less. Now one thing I also want to just draw your attention to is, look, you can see some lines here, but I wouldn't get too pedantic when it comes to, you know, perfection at this point. All we're trying to do at the moment is just create our kind of guidelines and then work them out. Now what I'm doing here is I'm using a number 1, which is produced by Wool. This is the metal backed clipper guard. You have to be slightly careful because it can come flying off, so you have to kind of keep a hand on it. Now all I did with that was I just open blade it fully, and I'll just start to buff out that line that I just created using the barberless guard, and then close it halfway again, and then you start to work it slowly. All right. Just mindful that you're never really going past the previous guard that you made, and patience is really key here. You know, one thing that I've done here is I've gone directly into the 0.5 guard, which is the green one created by Wool. It's fully open, and obviously there's nothing wrong with starting fully open. It's kind of just to kind of test the waters and see how the hair reacts. Depending on how often and how quick your hair grows, your hair is not always going to react the exact same way to a clipper guard. So obviously the clipper guard, the power, you know, it stays fairly constant. But in terms of your hair, it might react differently depending if you've washed it, if there's any product in the skin, if you've been sweating, if you've been sleeping on it, if you've been wearing a hat. You know, it can react slightly different. So you're not always going to get this exact same output every single time, despite the fact that obviously the clipper guards and its performance, you know, will change. And exactly the same principle here. All I'm doing, closing the guard slightly, and then brushing up my head quickly just to kind of make sure that the canvas is clean, reassessing it, and then slowly working out. Now all I've done here is I've kind of taken off that guard now, and I've just decided to buff out the bottom line. Alright. Now one little gem of advice I'd give you is, when you've been doing this for so long and cutting your hair for so long, alright, you become a bit more accepting of the haircut, and you're willing to just get the job completed to an efficient, acceptable level, right? Whereas in the beginning, when I first started doing this, every single step I was being very attention to detail, very immaculate, making sure everything was perfect. And in the end, the haircut was taking like over a couple of hours, right? In this video, it's only about 25 minutes, but this was probably about 45 minutes worth of cutting, not including the trim on the top. On a good day, I could do a fade in about maybe half an hour, which obviously is the key for me. Trying to save time, trying to avoid going to the barbers, trying to avoid waiting and wasting that money. So again, you know, the part of the part of the hair that I'm working on now is obviously just working out that bottom line, just adapting the lever shut and close, and then obviously just using the clipper guards to kind of pick out the areas that I feel need to be readjusted. Now, if you can notice, I am kind of focusing on one side a bit more. Yes, because I have edited the video, but also because sometimes when you break down a piece of work into smaller sections, it gives you a bit more time to focus, opposed to trying to work on the full body. If I tried to do the whole head and, you know, use the 0.5 guard all the way up around, you know, it might not be as efficient, because I might have to spend more time refining. Now all I've done here is I've taken 1.5 guard and I'm just buffing out the wall babyliss 1.5 to the 2, and that's just to give myself comfort that, you know, there's nothing sticking out here, right? And then if you can see here, I'm just chopping and changing between the 1.5 and the 1 and the 0.5 guard, right? Some barbers could say this is inefficient, but you know, the truth is, after all the video editing is done, when you're doing it on your own and stuff, right, the reality is it's a piece of work, it's a piece of art, you know, it can't be replicated. So one day will never be replaced by AI, hopefully, but it just goes to show that, you know, not one piece of art, one drawing or one fade will be the same exactly every single time. It'll be different depending on the length of the hair, and as I mentioned, the condition of obviously your scalp, you know, what the conditions are like. Now, one thing about cutting hair outside is you don't have to worry about natural light. Just be mindful though that if there is sunshine, it can change obviously how the hair looks in the sunlight. I'm standing here next to a fence, and obviously I've tried to position the mirror in a way that the light isn't shining directly on my head. Okay, so I hope you'd agree that that right side is starting to, you know, come together. Quick dust off. Now, wanting to draw your attention to something very important, right? You look at what I'm doing. I'm holding the trimmer and I've frozen it here, right? Because all I've done is I'm using this trimmer to just dab the line, right? So I don't really do much of a shape up on the C-cut, because a lot of it's gone because of the foil shavers that I'm using. So all I'm doing is I'm dabbing the line a couple of times, right? Just to start that initial box, right? I'm not going heavily in, I'm not making huge contact, I'm not pressing too hard. I'm just using the edge of the trimmer blade to create that line, right? And all I do is I use a cutthroat blade, dry, and I go against the grain and just obviously get that nice straight clean cut line, right? I know if you're looking at this from the back, you think, oh, there's probably lines here, so on and so forth, but you know, as I mentioned, it's a work of art. We try to get obviously the initial body of work completed first, and then we go back and do our refinements, right? But initially this is looking how I want it to look, but we're not, you know, nitpicking and becoming, you know, too pedantic. We're just trying to get the body of work completed, and then we can obviously add our amendments in at the end. All right. One quick check out there, and if you can see here, I'm pushing away. Obviously, if you haven't used cutthroat blade before, you will need to practice. It's not something that should be taken lightly. It is very, very, very sharp, and it's for people who are, you know, confident with the blade. Previously I used to use water, but I've kind of moved away from that and just use a dry blade. Now, if you see what I'm doing here, I'm pulling the hair down, right? I'm kind of over directing it because my hair naturally goes to the right side. So what I'm doing there is I'm pulling the hair out of the way on the right side, right? Because what I do is I shape up from the middle. But what I tend to do is bring the hairline up to where the hairline is, so I don't have it as a fringe hanging down over my forehead. I try to go as high as the line can go without taking the hairline back, right? Now, after I've moved the right side out, all I do is I start to work on the left side, and I work from the inside, moving out, right? Now, you can't see it here, but the key of this mirror is if you're working on the left side of your head, you can use your eyeballs to look on the right mirror, and obviously just cast your focus to see the part of the blade that you'd have a blind spot. So I'm using my right hand, so naturally there'll be a blind spot on the left side of the trimmer blade, right? So when it comes to doing the left corner, you won't be able to see it. So if you see here, my right eyeball is looking at the right side to see where it ends up, right? That is a key master technique that I would recommend for anybody who has difficulty. Like, I'm not ambidextrous, I can only use my right hand when I'm trimming. So having that ability to see left gives me leverage, right? And all I do there is quickly have a look. Then I've combed down the right side, so I've started in the middle again, okay? And then all I'm doing is I'm rolling the clipper head, okay? Left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right. And same principle applies. Now I will look to the left, okay? As you can see here, working to the right, working to the right, working to the right, remembering that I've brushed my hair down so it's over directed down. Right? Naturally my hair would be pulled to the right, but that's not the style I'm going for, okay? Remembering that I'm trying to go as high up as I can go to the hairline without pulling the hairline back to maintain that level of thickness. One thing I will share is, obviously my hairline at this age isn't the same as my hairline when I was 18, 19. So you have to be very careful in terms of keeping the thickness. So don't over push it back, or don't go too hard. One of the keys about pulling my hair down and directing it down opposed to pulling it to the side, how it naturally grows, is it maintains that black thickness. So people always think, oh yeah, he's got a great hairline, blah blah, but it's just tricks of the barber, being able to manipulate that growth of hair. Just to give you the sharpest, stiffest line. And again, as I mentioned, you're not gonna. A lot of barbers won't tell you this, but here all I'm doing is I'm simply just refining it and making sure that I'm happy with the end result beforehand. A lot of editing does happen, but what I've tried to do is try to keep the right side and the hairline and the stuff that I want you guys to see. Obviously, the creative process, right? Now, I hope you'll agree that without being too critical of my work, it is starting to shape up. What I'm doing here is quickly brush myself off. And again, I think this is the part in the haircut where I've said, okay, well, I'm kind of happy where I am now. This will pass. If I was to walk on the street, I don't think anyone would pull me over with a sign saying that this guy cuts his own hair. I think that this would pretty much pass. And the reality is, as I said in the beginning, I used to obsess over every single inch in detail, but as I've become older, I've just become quite comfortable with just having a haircut, if I'm totally honest. It's a bit different when you're working on other people, because whether they're paying clients or whether you're just trying to give them a good haircut, whether it's your friend or your kids or brother or my brother, uncle, dad, whoever it is, obviously you want to. It's a lot easier because you have two hands. But when you're doing it at home, the general theme is trying to save money, trying to save time. I did mention that you go to barbers nowadays, but 5, 6 on a high street, there could be a wait, could be a cost for queue jump. You could have to pay for parking. You could have to wait. It's just for me, being a busy individual working in this city, I didn't have time to go sit in a barber shop or pay this extortionate rate for a haircut. And then the times I did pay 30 quid, 35 quid for queue jump, the barber cut my hair in like 15 minutes, which I just didn't agree with. If I'm paying money, I want quality. I'm not saying that quality can't come quickly, but what I'm saying is I don't want my work or the service to be rushed. It's quite simply, if you pay a lot of money to have a car fixed, you don't want the car to be fixed in a matter of seconds. You want them to know that they've taken due diligence, they've had a bit of structure, they've done reports, they've exercise expertise. Sometimes I think rushing is just not the best way. So again, rant over. A big part of obviously me creating this video is because I want people to be able to cut their own hair. Now, my hair is Asian, it's black, jet black, and at the shorter levels it's quite thin. Right, when it's quite long, it tends to get quite thick and dark. Right, which is obviously one of the benefits. So for me, keeping my hair medium to long length on top is always better for the fade. One of the keys of having a skin fade with extra dark hair or dark hair is there's a really nice contrast. So if you can see there's a good contrast between obviously the skin and the black, right? Now, this is kind of showing you coming towards the end of the fading section. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to hit it up with the scissors next. Alright, so all I'm going to do is quickly just wet the hair. So I've combed the hair forward, combed the hair so it's wet throughout. Now you'll have to assess your own hair before obviously doing the scissor trim on top. One of the things is obviously it's not always going to grow back at the same length. You know, if your hair is anything like mine, the back might grow longer or quicker than the front, so it's probably a good idea to obviously just know what you're working with. If you're like me and you've been cutting your hair for a while, you just know obviously where you're fast in your growth or where your growth is slow. But what I tend to do is I tend to start at the back, and all I do is I kind of establish my first guideline and I work forward. The reason for that being the hair at the back tends to grow a lot quicker than the front. Now, one of the things I didn't show you was at the highest point of my head, all I've done is I've combed the head directly forward and I've used that as the first guideline. And then anything behind that point I've just combed directly down, right? And I'm not going to interfere with that. All I'm going to do is take small sections. And I know you can't see it, I'll probably do it on another video, and all I'm doing is I'm point cutting opposed to cutting it straight. Reason being, less margin for error. If I was to cut it straight, very very short, you can kind of see the lines, but all I'm doing here is I'm being very 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 careful just to take off the edges and then work to about maybe 3 fingers. I'm making contact with my pinky to the scalp, and then I'm using the length of those 3 fingers from the pinky, the ring finger and the middle finger, and then the top finger, the index finger, just to clamp down the hair. Alright. Now right at the very very back, what you can see here is starting at the middle section, and I'm just taking off a little bit. Alright, I don't want to go too short. Length is strength, so just remember that when you go too short there's a lot of more margin for error, because when the hair's dried, when it sits after the hair's been cut, when it's wet, you can't really see. So really all I want to do is just add a little bit of texture, reduces the length down. Right now, as I mentioned, obviously hairline being a key thing for a lot of men, obviously getting older and stuff. One of the key things is obviously the hair towards the front, where you'd have bangs or a fringe. What you don't want to do is you don't want to go too short, and sometimes you don't want to go all the way to the hairline and obviously cut that down too. You might want to stop maybe 1 inch or 2 back, and then just give the hair the impression of that thickness and that darkness. Right, so that's a key tip. Now, one thing I won't be doing on this haircut, because it's outdoors, is blow drying. But usually what I tend to do, whether I do the scissor trim first before the fade or the scissor trim afterwards, I'll give a quick blow dry in the direction I want, and that's just to really give me an idea of what it looks like when it's dry. Now, you can see here what I just mentioned about going a bit further from the front, not going all the way to the front of the hairline. I'm going back a couple of inches, right, and I'm just cutting the hair that hangs over the front, right, because that additional weight will change the way that the hairline sits. Now, one of the reasons why I did the shape up before I did the scissor cut is because whilst the hair has that thickness and that darkness, and I put the shape in the corners in, right, that's kind of the look I'm going for. So this scissor cut is purely just to reduce the length, add a bit of texture, but I'm not trying to reduce the length of the front using the scissors. Right, I want to maintain that thick darkness at the front of the haircut. All right, have a quick check. All right, and all I'm doing now is I'm working backwards, obviously just to check my lengths. And if you can see here, just little sections, right? Sometimes if you're working on someone else or a different head is different because you're able to obviously use your hands in a different way. But obviously when you're working on yourself, I just try to avoid letting my hair get too long, so I can just manage it with just a quick trim as I'm doing now, just point cutting. Obviously, as I mentioned, if it's a lot of length, there's less room for error. Obviously, the shorter you get, the more easier it is to kind of see if you've made a mistake. So all I'm doing here is just keeping the hair at a decent standard, and then at the end, all I'm going to do is pretty much just blow dry the hair, add a bit of product. But yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell. Now, I will write this system down in terms of how I do it, and obviously the tips and tricks that I use for my hair. You can use this fade for pretty much any type of hair, bar afro. When you are doing it for afro, you do need to keep the hair flat, and obviously I can create another video on that. But thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon.